Welcome back to this amazing channel where we try to remain nuanced and balanced on these political subjects. So far in this channel, I've been pretty favorable in my view toward Vivek and how he's handled the new media platforms that he's gone on and the kinds of conversations that he's had. But I guess I couldn't have had such high expectations for him going on to this very traditional media debate stage and delivering a performance that, to be honest, I have mixed feelings about. I just wanted to say up front that this is not going to be a channel where I'm just sucking Vivek's dick. That's not what we're doing here. We're here to provide the good and the bad when it comes to interesting political candidates and interesting subjects in general. The reason why I've focused on Vivek so far is because he tends to generate a lot of views, number one. And number two, I genuinely think he's an interesting candidate who is offering certain things that a lot of the other mainstream candidates are not offering. That being said, let's get into his performance, not just in terms of how I think he's going to be received by the Republican base that he's catering to, but also whether he'd met the expectations that I had for him. I will talk about that in this video. So let's get into it. Let's bring up something that he's gotten a lot of flack about from the mainstream media. There was this moment when he was introducing himself to the American people, where he pulled out a line that was eerily similar to something that Barack Obama used in a 2004 DNC speech. Now, the first headline that I saw on this was, Vivek Ramaswamy plagiarizes Barack Obama. Whoa, that seems quite significant. He literally plagiarized the speech in the same way that Melania Trump plagiarized a Michelle Obama speech? Not exactly. There was a line that he used. Vivek's specific words were skinny guy with a funny last name. That was very similar to Obama's line, skinny kid with a funny name.
Skinny guy with a funny last name and what?
Skinny kid with a funny name who...
Notice these terms are not identical. The content is, you could say, similar, but I don't think that line is something that can be trademarked. It's not something that Barack Obama owns. It's something that can be used, and Vivek didn't even use the same particular words. To me, this is a bit of a nothing burger. Plagiarize, that's a strong word to describe what exactly transpired. To me, when I hear feedback like that, my interpretation is those media organizations who are jumping on this have something out for Vivek. Let's get into something more substantial. There was a significant moment here where the conversation turned to former President Trump, and Vivek decided to declare the following.
President Trump, I believe, was the best president of the 21st century.
On this channel, I've made it clear that I am not a huge fan of former President Trump, and if I wanted to break down why I believe that, I'd need to do a very thorough analysis of Trump's presidency, all of the details pertaining to his presidency. I'm not really interested in all of these convictions and the arrests going on right now. Mainly, I would want to focus on the presidency itself. As a matter of principle, I'm actually against this idea that we can judge a president's performance in such close historical proximity. I think it's a mistake to declare so confidently that there is a definitive best president of the United States in the 21st century to this point. My intuition is to tell me that it isn't President Trump. That being said, I had a realization when I was thinking about this statement. Donald Trump is the best president of the 21st century. It's a statement that I wouldn't be able to defend. Simultaneously, it's not a statement I would be prepared to go against. And perhaps that just signifies that I have a limitation in terms of my knowledge, but perhaps it signifies that I'm actually thinking about this a little bit more than most people. Are you really so certain that your president that happens to align with your party actually did things that resulted in a better outcome for the country? People who, for example, say that Hillary Clinton's presidency would have been better for the US than Donald Trump. How do you know that? And how are you so sure? Again, I'll do a breakdown of past presidents, what they have done, Trump's presidency, Biden's presidency, and Obama's presidency. It would take a very, 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 very long time. And when it comes to actually gathering decent information on Donald Trump and what was accomplished during his time in office, I mean, you have to sort of sift your way through all of the media bias in order to do it. And so once again, some people are going to say this is a cop-out of an answer. The fact that I'm not coming down strongly on one side, I don't think it's a cop-out. I think if you are so confident in that assertion, as Vivek was on the debate stage, you're simply foolish. Needless to say, I was disappointed in this moment from Vivek, but not entirely surprised, I guess. I know Vivek believes that Trump is a good president from a policy perspective. I know that Vivek disagrees with Trump's actions on January 6th, but doesn't think it should constitute all of this legal action that's being taken. I understand that Vivek is running within a Republican primary where he's trying to compete with Trump, and in order to do that, he needs to get Trump voters, and so he's doing a little bit of dick riding. That's the position that he's in as politician. Luckily, I'm in a position of analysis, so I don't have to ride anyone's dick. Another important moment of the debate, something that got headlines, was Vivek saying that the climate change agenda is a hoax, where he got some boos from the crowd. I don't know my audience's position on climate change at this point, but we have to pay attention to the words climate change agenda. I was hearing a lot of people on Twitter and in their post-debate recaps talk about how Vivek had declared that climate change is a hoax. And I have to point out, that was not what he declared. And I really don't like when people twist language in such a way.
I'm the only person on the stage who isn't bought and paid for, so I can say this. The climate change agenda is a hoax.
Vivek said the climate change agenda was a hoax, which on its own is sort of manipulative language, because he understands that by saying climate change agenda, he's able to not technically lie while also appealing to certain voters in the base that might also believe that climate change itself is a hoax. Very interesting tactical strategy. Once again, I think this is a political calculation because there is nuance being left out here. I think far more accurate and less disingenuous to say the process of human-influenced climate change is taking place. We are within an era, an extinction era, called the Anthropocene. Now, whether the fact that humans are contributing to climate change should warrant all of the policy action and investment that we are taking, that's a different question. And I wish that Vivek were clearer in differentiating those two. I am someone who always thought it was horrifying that Republicans would constantly talk about how climate change is a hoax. Jim Inhofe brought in a snowball to Congress and said this is proof that climate change isn't happening.
In case we have forgotten, because we keep hearing that 2014 has been the warmest year on record, I asked the chair, you know what this is? It's a snowball. And that's just from outside here. So it's very, very cold out.
Are you nuts? Are you a fucking idiot? Yes, climate change is happening. The question is all the action that is taken to try to protect us from climate change, the economic investment, is that justified? And that's a much more interesting discussion. And you can start talking about things how more people die every year on average from the cold than from the heat, and how in third world countries, fossil fuel production is very important in order to provide for people's growing well-being. You can watch an interview that Chris Williamson did with Bjorn Lomborg. That's a great conversation.
Climate change will affect the poorest the most. That's absolutely true. But what you have to remember is everything bad affects poor people most.
Bjorn is breaking down efficient ways of using money. Bjorn's point is there are many areas where we could probably invest a little bit less and get more out of it, as opposed to incessantly focusing on climate change. I think that's a great argument, and I think that in these kinds of political debate formats, that nuance is not possible. Then again, it's always disappointing to hear these kinds of things stated so bluntly. I'm sort of criticizing everyone there. I'm criticizing Vivek's use of the language, and I'm criticizing the people who deliberately or non-deliberately said that he was denying climate change. Not true. He was saying the climate change agenda is a hoax. Pay attention to people's language. Oh, yes. There was a moment where Vivek was pressed on foreign policy by Nikki Haley, his plan to withdraw funding from Israel, and he was pressed on his plan to withdraw funds from Ukraine. Nikki Haley has significantly more foreign policy experience than Vivek. I think that's a non-controversial statement. And in this dynamic, doing the eyeball test, who seems to know what they're talking about more? Nikki Haley seemed completely in command of that interaction.
No, Boeing came off of it, but you've been pushing this lie. You've been pushing this lie all week, Nikki.
You want to go and defund Israel? You want to
okay, let me address that. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm going to address each of those right now.
He looked flustered. I've noticed that when Vivek gets flustered, he starts to give out this this smile, this comforting smile, as if like, oh, I've got this under control, I'm all good. I don't read it as him being under control. I read it as him trying to hide his discomfort in the moment. Although, I think he also enjoys the thrill of being in these debate settings. He's that kind of guy. So what really annoys me about politicians, everyone does this, is they'll say something about an opponent of theirs that represents one portion of their position, but doesn't really fully encapsulate the nuance. Vivek's position is, yes, he wants to withdraw funding from Israel, but that makes it seem that he's anti-Israel and he doesn't want Israel to succeed as a nation. That's not true. And if you actually listen to him outline the nuance as to why we shouldn't be spending billions of dollars to fund Israel, it makes a little bit more sense. That being said, in the moment when someone snaps off that one-liner at you and it takes you a little bit off guard, well, this is the result. Also, I should say that I really don't have that much foreign policy knowledge at all. It's one of my weaknesses. I just don't follow a lot of global news. So when it comes to Haley's challenge of Vivek's assessment that the greatest threat is not Russia, it's Russia's alliance with China, and therefore we should pull out of Ukraine as to not push Russia into China's arms, I just don't know enough about the issue to really make an intelligent claim. If I just had to make a dumb, intuitive assessment on the issue, I would guess Nikki Haley probably knows what she's talking about a bit more. Okay, that was that moment. What else happened? Let's look at Twitter. Going through Twitter. Oh, right. He mentioned ending the Department of Education. Couldn't agree with him more about that. I think the whole public school apparatus is completely disintegrating before our eyes. Clearly, public education is not working, and we spend a lot of money on this, and I think that money is, for the most part, completely wasted. And look, the government is $31 trillion in debt. That's not good. Let's, what else do we have? Chris Christie smashed Vivek Ramaswamy. Oh, yeah. I think Christie's ChatGPT comment about Vivek was, just really fucking stupid. It doesn't even make sense. What are you saying? People talking about Vivek getting paid to go to Harvard by George Soros. Here. Pence gets booed for calling Vivek a rookie. Oh, yes. Last thing was the closing speech. He said something about the Constitution was what allowed us to win the Revolutionary War. And people were pointing out how the Constitution wasn't created until 1787, which was 4 years after the Revolutionary War ended in 1783, and that it didn't go into effect until 1789. And so to say that the Constitution was the reason why we won the Revolutionary War was completely false, and this person who is advocating for implementing a civics test in order to earn the right to vote doesn't even know anything about American history. And to that, I say, there is a very literal interpretation to this statement. Assume that he's actually saying the Constitution itself was what allowed us to win the Revolutionary War. I don't know. I just don't think it's entirely warranted. And then there's a loose interpretation, which is what I think he was going for more. This idea that later went on to represent the Constitution was what allowed us to persevere. Because let's face it, it's a closing statement. There are a lot of platitudes in this closing statement. Are people really speaking policy-based facts when they're finishing up their night? No, not really. So again, I think that's a bit of a nothing burger. People were bothered that Vivek said that God exists. I can see why people get tired when politicians use this statement about believing in God, there being one God and all of this. And in Vivek's case, it's sort of funny because he's a Hindu, but at the same time, he's running for president of the United States, so he's trying to appeal to Christians in the country, and it's just a complete disaster. I get it, politicians have to do this, and it comes across at this point as a trite platitude. That's that. I definitely missed some moments during this whole debate, and I didn't really talk about other candidates. That's by design. I would be talking for hours and hours if I were to actually break down every single candidate's debate performance, including the candidates like Doug Burgum and Asa Hutchinson, who you might have just completely forgotten that they were on the stage. How do I think Vivek performed to the general public and to the Republican base? I think it was a good performance from that standpoint. I think he's going to get a slight bump in the polls, although generally these debates don't have that much influence on the polls. The major poll climbs happen just as a progression of being on the campaign trail, getting your message out there. I don't think he's going to lose ground because a lot of the people who are already in support of him are diehard supporters, and they're not going to waver. I still think he's the most intelligent person on that stage. People who are calling him an ignoramus or a dumbass, I think you're smoking something. Whatever you're smoking, I want to get on some of that. I would like to see people who think that Vivek Ramaswamy is such an idiot try to debate him. I don't think I would be confident, for as critical as I've been in this conversation, if I were to go up in a debate against him. He is rhetorically gifted, and he comes with quite a number of facts. More so in this criticism, I was commenting on his integrity and how he handled the responsibility of introducing himself to the American people. Yes, the nuance is going to come. Some of it just bothered me. Lastly, I'll briefly mention the framework for this, although I might go into more depth in a future video. There was this interview I saw between Vivek and some reporter on CNN where she was asking him about a New York Times quotation, something he said about 9/11, and he denied saying that quotation. The person who interviewed him actually released the audio footage, and it turned out that he was lying. He basically just lied to the CNN reporter's face. Or he forgot about the statement itself, which is, I guess, a possibility, a generous interpretation. And this is coming from someone who's had a lot of positive feelings toward him. I think he's one of these people that isn't necessarily lying all the time, but he has the capability of lying. And when he does, it's very difficult to tell that he's lying unless you look into it. And that's dangerous. Just keep that in mind. If we're going to elect someone president who is a very gifted liar, how much can you trust that? People bring up the used car salesman vibe. To me, that's just a bunch of ad hominem. But you got to look at the actual evidence of at what points has this person deliberately deceived people within interactions in order to make himself look better. I think I got through everything that I wanted to. Thank you for listening to my own interpretation of Vivek's performance, and I will see you in the next video. Take care. Have a good weekend.